January 22, 1944. Before dawn, the Tyrrhenian Sea lay unnaturally calm off the coast of Anzio, Italy. At 02 hours, the first Allied landing craft cut its engines and drifted toward the blacked-out shoreline. Thousands of men waited in silence, boots braced, rifles held tight. This was meant to be the decisive stroke, a blow behind German lines that would shatter the defense of Italy in a single cascading collapse. Far from the beachhead in Allied headquarters, Dwight D. Eisenhower studied reports with a growing unease. The plan appeared elegant on paper. Coordinated pressure from the south, a sudden amphibious landing to the rear, and the German line would finally snap. It was the logic of overwhelming force, applied with confidence. But Italy had already taught him one lesson. Nothing here broke quickly. Across the peninsula, Albert Kesselring was awake and waiting. He had been awake for weeks. Kesselring understood Italy as few others did, not as a battlefield to be held inch by inch, but as a landscape to be spent carefully. Ridges, rivers, ruined villages, winter mud, each could bleed an enemy without yielding decision. When reports of the landing reached him, there was no panic, no order to stand or die, only calculation. The Allied soldiers expected resistance, then retreat. Instead, they found emptiness, roads undefended, hills unoccupied. It felt wrong, too quiet. The absence of battle was not victory, it was an invitation. Kesselring had no intention of throwing his army into the sea. He would give ground, always just enough. Eisenhower sensed it before the maps confirmed it. This campaign was not becoming a breakthrough. It was becoming something else, a contest of endurance. The Germans were not collapsing. They were bending, deliberately, and every mile forward would cost more time than the last. Italy was not a race. It was a siege measured in weeks, blood, and patience. To understand why the German line did not break, one had to understand what Italy meant and what it did not. For the Allies, the Italian campaign was never meant to be the war's centerpiece. It was a means, a way to draw German divisions away from France, to keep pressure constant, to prove momentum. For the German command, it was something else entirely. Italy was a time. By late 1943, the peninsula had already exceeded Allied expectations. The fall of Sicily had been swift. The overthrow of Mussolini was dramatic. Rome, many believed, would follow just as quickly. Yet the German response had been ruthless in its restraint. Rather than defend cities for pride, they defended geography for survival. Rivers became walls. Mountains became fortresses. Retreats were executed not in panic, but on schedule. The Gustav Line was the clearest expression of this strategy. Anchored on Monte Cassino, it blocked the most direct road to Rome. From a distance, it appeared vulnerable. Too long, too thin, but it was designed to do only one thing: delay. Every Allied assault was met with artillery perfectly registered on approach routes. Every gain of ground exposed another killing zone. Attacks succeeded tactically and failed strategically, again and again. In Allied councils, frustration grew. The numbers favored them overwhelmingly. More men, more guns, complete air superiority. The logic was simple. Pressure everywhere, all at once, and the defense would fracture. But the German line did not behave like a rigid structure. It behaved like a joint, flexing under stress, then locking again just short of collapse. Messages from the front told the same story in different words. Units advanced, then stalled. Casualties rose without decisive result. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. Winter rains turned roads into rivers of mud. Tanks sank, supply columns backed up for days. Time, once assumed abundant, began to feel dangerously scarce. The Anzio landing had been intended to change this equation. Instead, it revealed its true nature. The German response was immediate but controlled. Forces were rushed in not to destroy the beachhead outright, but to contain it. Counterattacks were sharp, localized, and costly, but never reckless. The objective was not victory in a single blow, it was containment until the opportunity passed. This refusal to be broken carried a psychological weight. Allied commanders found themselves fighting an enemy who did not react as expected. There were no desperate last stands, no dramatic collapses, only orderly withdrawals and sudden counterblows, timed to maximize loss and confusion. What emerged was a realization, slow and unwelcome. Coordination alone would not end this campaign. Brilliance would not unlock it. Italy was consuming plans faster than they could be written. The German defense was not failing, it was functioning exactly as intended. The campaign was becoming a test not of force but of endurance, and endurance, unlike firepower, could not be summoned on demand.
By February 1944, the illusion of momentum was gone. The battle for Monte Cassino had become the focal point of Allied frustration, a single massif holding an entire army group at bay. Assault followed assault. Airstrikes pulverized stone that had stood for centuries. Infantry climbed slopes under fire so precise it felt preordained. Each time, the outcome was the same. Ground taken, ground lost. Time spent, men buried. Kesselring watched this with grim satisfaction. He never demanded the impossible of his commanders. No line was sacred. No village was worth annihilation. What mattered was rhythm, retreat before encirclement, counterattack before consolidation, withdrawal before destruction. His orders were consistent: make the enemy pay, then step back. The terrain would do the rest. The Germans' greatest weapon was not their artillery, nor their discipline. It was their refusal to chase victory. They fought without the need for triumph, only delay. When Allied pressure intensified, they did not stiffen everywhere. They selected points of resistance and abandoned the rest. This elasticity denied Eisenhower the one thing his strategy depended on: a decisive rupture. Inside Allied headquarters, the tone darkened. Reports from Anzio were especially troubling. The beachhead still existed, but it was no longer a dagger aimed at the German rear. It had become a pocket, hemmed in, shelled daily, its troops exhausted by constant alarm. The landing that was meant to unhinge the Gustav line had instead been absorbed into it, another pressure point carefully managed. Eisenhower began to see the pattern. Every Allied move produced a German response that was smaller, cheaper, and slower, but never late. The defense did not collapse because it was not built to hold permanently. It was built to survive. Kesselring was trading space for time with mathematical discipline, fully aware that every month spent in Italy was a month the Allies could not spend elsewhere. Letters from soldiers reflected a growing bitterness. They spoke of hills taken 3 times, of towns reduced to rubble without changing the front line, of an enemy who seemed to know exactly when to stand and when to vanish. There was no sense of facing a cornered force. This was an opponent in control of his own retreat. The bombing of the Cassino Abbey marked a turning point, not tactically but psychologically. Its destruction failed to break the German line and instead provided them with ready-made fortifications amid the ruins. What was meant to shatter resistance only hardened it. It was a moment that could not be reversed. The campaign crossed from frustration into attrition. Eisenhower did not abandon the campaign, but his understanding matured. Italy would not yield to pressure alone. It would have to be worn down, step by step, season by season. Victory here would not come from surprise or speed. It would come from persistence so relentless that even a defense designed to never quite fail would finally run out of ground to give. That realization carried a cost. It meant accepting casualties without drama, progress without headlines, a war fought not for brilliance, but for exhaustion.
The decisive moment did not arrive with a breakthrough. It arrived with acceptance. By March 1944, the Italian campaign had stripped away illusion. The Allied command no longer spoke of collapse, only of pressure sustained long enough to matter. Eisenhower's irreversible decision was not a single order, but a strategic surrender of expectation. Italy would not be won quickly. It would be endured. This understanding reshaped everything. Operations were no longer framed around bold envelopment, but around accumulation. Artillery massed methodically, supply lines reinforced with redundancy, manpower rotated with grim regularity. The goal was no longer to outthink Kesselring, but to outlast him. It was an admission that brilliance had met its equal in discipline. For Kesselring, the cost of his own strategy was also becoming clear. Each withdrawal preserved his army, but it consumed irreplaceable terrain. Every ridge abandoned narrowed his options. Every delay bought time, but time itself was finite. He was defending not Italy, but Germany's larger war effort, fully aware that defeat here was acceptable, so long as it was slow. The final Allied push against the Gustav Line in May was conducted without illusion. Over 1,600 guns opened fire in a coordinated barrage that lasted hours. It was not subtle, it was not elegant, it was overwhelming by design. When the line finally gave way, it did so not in panic, but in sequence. German units pulled back as ordered, fighting, retreating, surviving. The breakout from Anzio followed, not as a sudden rupture, but as a release from containment. German forces disengaged before encirclement could become annihilation. Rome lay open not because the Germans were destroyed, but because holding it no longer served the purpose of delay. On June 4, 1944, Allied troops entered the city. The moment was symbolically powerful, but strategically muted. 2 days later, the landings in Normandy would eclipse it entirely. Italy had done its work. It had consumed divisions, time, and attention. It had forced the Allies to learn patience under fire. For Eisenhower, the lesson was carried forward. Future campaigns would reflect this understanding, that not all enemies could be shocked into defeat, that some wars were won only by pressure applied longer than the defender could bear. In Italy, he learned that coordination meant nothing without endurance. Kesselring, for his part, had proven something equally enduring. An army could lose ground, cities, even a capital, and still remain unbroken. His defense did not fail. It simply reached the limit of what delay could achieve. The decision on both sides was now complete. One chose persistence without glamour. The other chose survival without victory. From this point on, the outcome was inevitable, even if the end was still distant. The meaning of Italy became clear only after it was over. When Rome fell, it did not signal triumph in the traditional sense. There was no enemy routed in disorder, no army destroyed in the field. The German forces withdrew north in disciplined columns, already preparing new lines. What ended in Italy was not resistance, but illusion, the belief that modern war still rewarded decisive blows above all else. For the Allies, the campaign left scars that numbers alone could not explain. More than 300,000 casualties had been absorbed for ground that was never intended to be decisive. Yet those losses were not wasted. They purchased something intangible, but essential: time. German divisions that might have contested Normandy or tied down in mountains and valleys, fighting battles designed to lose slowly. Eisenhower carried this lesson forward with quiet gravity. In Northwest Europe, he would not expect the enemy to collapse under pressure alone. He planned for resistance that bent, regrouped, and countered. He accepted that victory would be cumulative, not theatrical. The patience learned in Italy became a doctrine. Kesselring's legacy was more paradoxical. He had executed one of the most effective delaying campaigns in modern history, preserving combat power against overwhelming odds. Yet in doing so, he revealed the ultimate limitation of elastic defense. Space once surrendered never returned. Delay could shape the war, but not reverse it. His refusal to be broken prolonged the conflict, but it could not change its direction. Contemporaries understood this even then. Allied soldiers spoke of Italy as a grinder, not a battlefield. German officers described it as a holding action that slowly consumed its own margin for survival. Both were correct. The campaign ended not with a collapse, but with exhaustion, strategic, logistical, human. What Italy demonstrated was that modern war was no longer a contest of single moments, but of sustained will. Terrain could be weaponized, retreat could be mastery, survival itself could be a strategy. And yet, even the most disciplined refusal to fail had an endpoint. This was the end of an era where defense meant standing firm at all costs. Kesselring proved that flexibility could frustrate even the most powerful coalition. Eisenhower learned that victory often belonged not to the boldest plan, but to the commander willing to endure without illusion. Nothing in Italy could be undone. The dead remained buried in its hills. The ruins remained. The lesson remained. History would remember the Italian campaign not for a single battle, but for what it revealed about power in the modern age, that wars are rarely won by breaking an enemy's pride in one blow, and more often by outlasting a defense designed to never quite fail.